So then, when shedding gets going in earnest, it's almost like somebody's shearing a sheep. There's gobs of hair start to get loose when they shift to their summer coats. And they get looking pretty ragged. And you start finding hair everywhere. So along the trails, anywhere there's been goats, you'll find little clumps of hair, like this on the Labrador T, or even bigger clumps like this one that I picked up. Actually, I think I might pick a little bit more of that up this year and see if I can't get enough for my daughter to do some knitting. The native people used mountain goat hair to make ceremonial robes, especially on the coast of BC. It was quite an important part of their tradition. And they used to make ceremonial spoons out of the horns. Okay, so they're all shedded out and ready for the summer. Here's a nanny with her summer coat. Quite thin, but even so, they're still quite susceptible to heat stress. Here's a billy in the summer. Nanny again. So when you come and do the surveys to them, typically there'll be a reaction. Sometimes they'll just stand there and look at you. Other times they'll move off. This one's got her tail up. So it means she's alarmed, and in fact she went down over the bank just after I took this picture. She'd been bedded in the sand right here when I came along. But oftentimes they'll be on ledges like this. Here's a couple up Higher Tower Creek. These goats had no idea I was there. I took my picture and left, and they never did budge. This is an interesting one. It's on top of one of the cliffs. It was in the evening, and I was coming along and saw the goats coming toward me feeding, and just leaned against a tree, and I had 9 goats within about 30 meters of me. Of course, I couldn't take any pictures because the moment I moved, then they left, and all I got was a picture of them leaving. But it was pretty cool. Here's a nanny with a fairly young kid just below me. So you notice the perspective on all these photos. Goats below, I'm above them. It's usually the other way around. Here's a billy on a ledge, hoodoo formation. So in summer things are pretty easy. You can see lots of green groceries all around within easy range of the escape terrain, so they don't have much trouble getting lots of food during the summer. And places, clumps of grass like this will be fed on in the fall and winter as well. This is Cliff 6. So how many goats here? These 2 are obvious. There's one right here too. Yeah, down here. And when you actually move the view, there's another one down here that you can't see behind the tree. So doing the survey, it's usually a matter of coming along and trying to get as many angles on the cliff as you can. Usually go along the top of the cliff and try and get views of where the goats might be. Sometimes the goats go down to the river and cross the river. Here's a photo taken by, I'm not sure who took, was that yours, Karen?
No.
Oh, it must have been in one of the other, we've had contractors doing the surveys for years, and this was taken by one of them. Here's another hoodoo formation, and this is a sequence, so I came along and I thought, well, I'll take a picture of the hoodoos. It's a nice day. Took the picture, moved 10 or 15 feet to my right, and oh, there's some goats there. So here's a nanny here lying down looking at me, and here's a yearling sitting there looking at me. And they were totally unconcerned, so I was in plain view taking pictures, and they were watching me and not really particularly concerned, not even willing to get up. And I thought, oh, that's nice, 2 goats. And then I moved a few more feet and a closer look, and I moved a little bit more, and there's another one hiding behind here. So this was a warm day, and they were about shade, so any little nook they could find that was in the shade, although this gal seemed to want to be out in the full sun. And then she got up, and you can see the crook in the horn here. See, it's fairly straight, and the crook's right there. In the summer coat, you can see the massive musculature in the front quarters, how good they are while she's stretching here. Here's another nanny a little further down that same day on another hoodoo, and she sees me and she says, I'm getting out of here, so she just casually dropped off the edge of the cliff. No problem. These guys I came along the top of the bluff, and I could smell that goats have quite a distinctive odor. I knew they were there somewhere, so I worked my way around, and they were in the cave. And if I hadn't smelled them, I would have missed those ones on the survey. So there's 3 goats here, 1, 2, 3. And they were in a nice, cool, shady cave because it was a warm day. And warm day was sort of like mid-20s, high 20s. Not particularly warm, but for them, they were having problems with the heat that day. So after the summer period's over, they start to grow out their winter coats, and their winter coats are similar to the goat on the table over there. Very long, very luxuriant, long outer guard hairs, and then softer under fur. Excellent insulation against the cold. This is a nanny. You can actually age a goat by looking at the winter period when they don't grow as much. So this was 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 4 years, and then harder to tell, but she was at least 4 years, and then some other years down the bottom. Here's a kid in the fall, and then here's the 2 of them put together. I was sitting there and they walked right up to me. So this is not a long lens. This is actually a wide angle lens, or almost a wide angle lens. And you can see the very different coat for the winter coat versus the summer coat. Way more luxuriant fur. That same day, I'm sitting eating lunch, and this Billy came walking right up to me. Here he is coming up the hill, and then he stopped. He saw me. At this point, he's only about 10 feet away, and then he walked here, which was only about 5 or 6 feet away from where I was sitting. And I got some good photos. The interesting thing about this is it's the rut. So the rut occurs in late November, early December, and the billies think that the way to make themselves nice for the ladies is to dig a hole in the dirt, pee in it, lie down, and then paw the pee, wet dirt all over their hindquarters. So if you ever see a goat in the middle of the fall that's dirty hindquarters like this, that's a billy. You don't need to look at his horns. So this was a young one. I think he's probably 3 or 4 years old. A really mature billy. His horns will be about the same length as his face. This guy's not that long, so he's reasonably young. And he was looking for love. And it wasn't me. So that same day, I found the group that was engaged in the rut. So this is a group of 22 goats. There are no young animals here. These are all adults. And when I got over closer and snuck up on them, I got views like this. So here's 5 goats. Here's the billy right here. And these others are all nannies. So in that group of 22 goats, there were, I think, 3 or 4 adult billies, and the rest were all nannies. So they were in a group that you wouldn't see with both adult billies and nannies at any other time of the year except during the rut. So after the rut's over, they're waiting for winter, leaves are all gone, and they're getting back into their nanny young animal groups, and the billies are off by themselves again, not to come together again until next year. The only other time you see billies together with nannies on a regular basis is when they're at salt licks. They'll group together there. And you will see young billies occasionally with the nanny kid groups, but those are usually young animals that haven't got kicked out to live on their own yet. The way they fight, you've got daggers for horns, so most of their dominance behavior is sort of intimidation, and they show the other guy their horns. I'm bigger than you and stronger than you, we don't need to fight. Yeah, I agree, let's go. If they do get into a serious fight, they don't butt heads like a mountain sheep might. They stand head to toe and they swing at the other guy's hindquarters. And if you look at the hide, the thickness of the hide on the hindquarters is way thicker than it is anywhere else on the body to provide some protection against the stabbing of the horns. And in fact, the natives used to use the hide on the hindquarters of mountain goats to make shields for fighting. So they would have a mountain goat hide shield because it was thicker than any other hide they could get. So back to some of Georgie Harrison's photos. This is between two trees. Here's a couple of mountain goats. I'll show you some other critters at that same spot in a few minutes here. In the winter, it's easy, of course, to see where they've been because they leave tracks. Here's where they've gone across Pinto Creek from one cliff to another. They like to walk single file when they're traveling from A to B, and they'll actually step in the other guy's footprints to a large point. And when they're up on a cliff in shallow snow, they don't like to get really energetic and raise their feet any more than they have to, so they actually drag their toes through the snow, and it makes these sort of double furrow tracks. Very distinct. It's really easy to tell that that's a mountain goat. You don't even have to look closely at the tracks. And then they're foraging to get to your picture, Glenn. So here they've pawed down through the snow on a steep slope, and they've been eating whatever is available. Grass, forbs, twigs, even dead leaves sometimes. Here's one of Georgie's camera photos. They're walking along one of these trails in the winter, and I believe there were a dozen goats. This isn't the best photo. It was taken from a slide and then scanned. But this is the sort of typical procession you'd see as they're moving between cliffs on their own. You do find occasionally where a goat has died. In nature, they're susceptible to avalanches and falls. That's probably a fairly major source of death. And of course, they're also on the menu for a number of large predators. Here's one that I found last year. This was a young animal that had been nailed by a cougar. And it was pretty distinctive. The cougar had a latrine just under a tree nearby where it had been defecating and burying it just like a cat would. And also the cat had been burying the remains while it fed on it. There wasn't a lot left of this animal, just a couple of leg bones. The head and skull was gone. Here's another one that I found just a few weeks ago. And actually the skull of this guy is on the table there if you want to look at it later. Cougar got him too. And the interest, I dragged him out. So this is typical of a cat. They very fastidious, skinned the animal, turned the skin inside out, got all the meat off the bones, but pretty much didn't disarticulate or eat the skeleton. And the rumen contents are actually still sitting on the hide in about the position they would have been in life. And here's the eye and the horns. When you look at that goat, when I boiled up the skull, he was missing a molar on his upper right side, and it looked like it had abscessed. It had been quite some time that he'd had tooth problems, and his teeth on the other side are worn down quite severely, and the ones on that side are worn very little at all. So it's probably a dental condition he had for quite a while, and might have contributed to his vulnerability and the way the cat got him. He was within steps of going over the bank where he would have been on a skate terrain. 6.5 years old, so lifespan in the wild of around 12. So he would have been nearing the end of his prime, which is probably 4 to 8, something like that. Here's back to Georgie's photos. So between those same two trees that I showed you the goats earlier, this is a big cougar. And then actually this is off some amazing photos from the internet. This cat was trying to get this goat, and it was on pretty rough terrain, but the cat could still get around. And the goat's just standing there. And then another goat came along, and it's sort of aggressive toward the cat. The cat took a swat at the second goat, and then the cat intimidated both the goats, and they took off to get to a steeper area, and eventually the cat gave up. So this is typical how they would get away from an attack by a cougar. The cougar hunts by stalking, so if it can sneak up and nail the goat before it can get onto these kinds of precipitous terrain, then the cougar's probably got the advantage. But once they're out on this, the goats have the advantage. Cougars aren't the only things. This is another amazing photo I found on the internet. This was actually taken in Jasper. The fellow said that he came along, he saw a bunch of goats, a single wolf. The wolf had this animal down and had it by the throat. You can see the blood on the throat of the goat. One of the other goats kind of came and distracted the wolf, and the wolf let go of the goat, and the goat jumped up and ran down the hill with the wolf off its heels and into the river. Got away. But certainly if wolves can catch the animals out away from the cliffs, then they're going to take goats as well. And then, of course, bears. This is the Georgie's camera photo again, and this is actually an ear tag bear walking along one of the goat trails. So same thing, if they happen to catch a goat away from escape terrain and can catch it,
Big bear.
they'll take the goat too. Yeah, that's a good sized bear, eh, Karen?
Yeah.
Doesn't look like he's the sort of thing you'd like to bump into in the middle of the night.
Looks like he's been in trouble.
Yeah, he's got a tag.
Got a tag.
Yeah. And here's that Billy again, close up to end the talk. That's pretty much it.
Nice, wow.
What?
How do you keep from, you said like you did multiple surveys, how do you keep from double counting?
Well, multiple surveys are, like we'll do 8 or 10 different surveys over the summer. So, yeah, double counting is an issue. So we used to have 3 surveyors would do it all in one day. And they would compare notes at the end of the day saying, I saw a bunch here, and when I left they were going that way, and if somebody else saw another bunch the same later in that way, then we wouldn't double count. We would try to eliminate those. You know, it would be a composition of the group. So if I saw a group of 5 and it had 4 nannies and a kid, and somebody else saw a group of 5 and it had 2 nannies and a couple of yearlings, that would be different animals.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's always a risk that you have some double counting. Generally though, when you do the survey, even if you alarm the goats, they don't leave that cliff. They just stay there. They move different places on the cliff. Occasionally they'll head off down the trail to maybe the next cliff system, but you don't see a panic reaction where they run for miles and then normally and sometimes they don't react at all. They just stand there and look at you and then you move on.
What's their reaction been to the harvesting?
So the one winter when we did harvesting there, we hired a contractor to go in, and they did before-after observations of the goat's behavior. And the only thing that was detectable when the harvesting started up was the goats spent a little bit more time in an alert and listening position. They didn't leave the areas and continued to use the cliffs closest to the harvesting. And so the actual behavior response was, yeah, they could hear it, but they weren't really doing anything other than listening a little bit more. So there was not much in the way of a behavioral response. And population response, if you go back to those charts, you could argue that harvesting is good for goats because the population's gone up. But
is there any evidence that there's an exchange between this population and anything further west?
Only anecdotal stuff. One of those earlier sightings was of a fellow from Grand Cache who saw 4 goats going across Highway 40 in the Fred Creek area. It's possible that there's some exchange. Probably there is, because there's Steve Cote and others are doing research on the Caw Ridge area up north of Grand Cache, and they did some genetic comparison, and these animals are distinct, but they're not so distinct that they've been isolated genetically for a long time. Probably for sure there's billies moving back and forth. And there are also occasions, I haven't experienced them myself, but I remember Ken Cranrod once went in the winter, a few days after a fresh snowfall, surveyed the whole canyon, couldn't find a single goat track even. So he came back out with the conclusion that goats have learned to climb trees, that's why he wasn't seeing them. But either he missed them, which I doubt, because he surveyed the whole area, or they weren't there right then. So they probably had moved somewhere and then came back later. Usually though, when you do their surveys, there's goats there, and even if you don't see goats, you see fresh sign.
I had
heard a story about goats being as far away as Valley View.
Yeah.
What's the furthest you ever saw or heard tell of goats wandering away
In Alberta?
from escape terrain?
Well, these billies will occasionally do some pretty things. So the Valley View one you might have heard about was, probably 10, 15 years ago.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, and there was actually a farmer on outside of, and he had one of those steel Quonset huts for a shop. And he went in, and he said he had the feeling that something was looking at him, and he had a shelf about 10 feet up off the floor, and there was a mountain goat lying on the shelf. And it made the papers, that one. And it was a young billy. I remember when I lived in BC, one showing up on the steps of the provincial court building in the middle of Prince George, which would have been probably 30, 40 miles from the nearest mountain. And when I lived in Kamloops, there was one showed up on a rock bluff right above Nicola Lake, south of Kamloops towards Merritt. And the closest goats to that would have been over the Goldbridge area, west of Cache Creek or north of Kamloops towards Barrier. So that was probably 70, 80 miles from where goats normally were.
So they wander a fair bit, eh?
Yeah, yeah, the young males do. Yeah.
Cool. I've heard of some, of eagles swooping down and trying to knock off young
Knock the
ones.
kids off.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another potential source of mortality. On the internet, there's actually some film of golden eagles knocking off, not mountain goats, but it's in Europe, but the same sort of thing,
Yeah.
knocking young kids off a cliff. There's actually a piece of film on YouTube on
Have you ever had a nanny stomp and look really mean?
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple
I
times.
thought it was just me.
Yeah, no, if you get too close, they're like any wild animal, they got a personal space thing. So
Yeah.
when I was taking pictures of that Billy that day when he was like, and I'm sitting down, I was a little bit concerned.
Yeah.
But he never made any aggressive moves, but yeah, I had them stamp their foot at me and say
Yeah.
back off. And actually, years ago when I was in BC, I was involved with a mountain goat transplant, where we caught mountain goats from one mountain and moved them to another where there weren't goats. And we tranquilized the goats from a helicopter and put chunks of garden hose over their horns, and then transplanted them to their new home and then let them go. We were using a narcotic with a reversal agent, and we had this Billy, no, it was Nanny, and we gave it the reversal agent. We forgot to take the garden hose off the horns.
No.
So the fellow I was working with dashed in as this goat was sort of regaining its capabilities and stood up and grabbed it, wrestled the garden hose off the horns, and then backed off, and she turned and came at him and was hooking at him. And actually he fell backwards and she hooked him, and her horns kind of went between on either side of his leg. So she didn't spear him. Just recently, fall of 2010, a man was killed by a mountain goat in Glacier National Park in Washington State.
Holy.
This was an area well known for goats, and it was a 63-year-old man, and he was sitting there minding his own business, and this goat that was known to be aggressive approached him, gored him in the leg, and then stood over him. He was eventually chased off by people throwing rocks at it, but the fellow died from the wound. That's the only example I've heard of